Hello, I'm Raihan Zamil, Senior Advisor at the Financial Stability Institute of the Bank for International Settlements. Welcome to this policy brief on the 2024 revisions to the core principles for effective banking supervision. This video will provide you with a comprehensive overview of the latest developments in banking supervision. But before we get into the details, let's take a broader look at what the core principles are, how they're used, how it has evolved over time, and who they apply to. The core principles set the minimum standard for banking supervision in all jurisdictions and provide the foundation for the regulation, supervision, governance, and risk management of the banking sector. Think of the core principles as the heartbeat of the vast bank supervisory ecosystem, with the main arteries being the enabling legal, regulatory, and supervisory frameworks needed to support a safe and sound banking system. The core principles are used by authorities as a benchmark to assess the effectiveness of their regulatory and supervisory frameworks, and by the IMF and World Bank as part of their external assessments of bank supervisory systems in the context of the Financial Sector Assessment Program. The core principles were initially published in 1997 and have been updated 3 times. Each update builds upon earlier versions to reflect regulatory and supervisory developments, structural changes in banking, and lessons learned from prior assessments by the IMF and World Bank. The main objective has always been to strike the right balance between raising supervisory standards while retaining the core principles as a flexible, universally applicable standard. Now, it's really important to emphasize that the core principles apply to all banks in all jurisdictions. And to ensure their universal applicability, the core principles embed the concept of proportionality. Proportionality allows supervisors to better match the level of regulatory requirements and the intensity of supervision to different banks and banking systems. The goal of proportionality is not to lower the bar, but to reflect different countries' circumstances and supervisor capacity. In short, the core principles allow for different approaches to prudential supervision as long as the overriding goals are achieved. There are 29 core principles in total. Principles 1 to 13 focus on the powers, responsibilities, and functions of supervisors, while principles 14 to 29 focus on prudential regulations and requirements for banks. Now, each core principle contains both essential and additional criteria. Essential criteria are baseline requirements that are applicable to all countries, while the additional criteria are recommended best practices that countries with more complex banks should aim for. IMF and World Bank core principle assessments are based on compliance with the essential criteria, although a country can also choose to be assessed and graded against the essential and additional criteria. So with this brief overview, let me now hand over to Monica, who can talk you through the major updates made to the core principles.
Thanks, Raihan. Hello, I'm Monica Spudic, member of the Secretariat of the Basel Committee for Banking Supervision. I've been supporting the work on the committee's latest revisions to the core principles, and I'd like to spend a few minutes going over some of the key changes, including the broader implications for banking supervisors. Let's get started. We've divided our update into 5 key areas: strengthening the effectiveness of supervision, including the importance of macro-prudential supervision, dealing with new and emerging risks, reinforcing corporate governance and risk management practices, embedding learnings for mitigating financial risks, and promoting operational resilience. All of these changes are underpinned by the concept of proportionality, which we've sought to give greater emphasis to throughout the current update. Strengthening the effectiveness of supervision was one of our primary goals when updating the core principles, as we wanted to ensure that all supervisors have the necessary powers and resources to meet their primary objective, which is to promote the safety and soundness of banks and the banking system. While the existing standard already provided a good baseline, we've made incremental changes to various principles that deal with the powers and responsibilities of supervisors. To be effective, supervisors must be able to supervise the whole banking group and need access to all relevant information. We're ensuring that supervisors have full access to bank records, including those that are held by service providers, parent companies and affiliates, and can request a broad range of information from other entities within the wider group. We're also ensuring that supervisors can continue to review all activities within a banking group, including those performed by service providers, as well as major acquisitions or investments by other entities within the group to assess whether they present risks to the bank. Supervisory transparency supports the industry in meeting prudential standards, so we're encouraging supervisors to publicly communicate their supervisory priorities and enforcement actions where appropriate. We have also strengthened expectations for decision-making and accountability, as well as legal protections for supervisors to ensure their independence. We've strengthened supervisory discretion to take enforcement action and to require that appropriate safeguards are in place to prevent delays. We're confident that these measures will help strengthen the effectiveness of supervision and enhance the transparency, accountability, and risk management capabilities for supervisors, leading to a more stable and sound banking system. Over the last decade, we've also seen how important it is to apply a system-wide macro perspective to the supervision of banks to identify and analyse systemic risks and take preemptive action to address them. In light of this, we're emphasising the importance of closer cooperation, both domestically and internationally, between authorities who are responsible for banking supervision, macro-prudential policy, and financial stability. We're also clarifying the role of supervisors in assessing and taking action to mitigate risks to banks and the banking system, with supervisors now being required to assess and identify systemically important banks in a domestic context. Supervisors are also being asked to monitor and assess common behaviours by banks, interlinkages and interconnections that could adversely affect banking or financial system stability. These updates will contribute to system-wide resilience and ensure that supervisors have appropriate tools to identify and tackle systemic risks. The world has changed a lot since the last version of the Core Principles was published in 2012. Since then, we've seen the emergence of new risks that we need to address, especially those linked to climate-related financial risks and the digitalisation of finance. Climate-related financial risks could affect the safety and soundness of individual banks and have broader implications for banking systems and financial stability. In light of this, supervisors will now be required to consider climate-related financial risks in their risk assessment of banks, and banks will be required to report information that allows supervisors to assess the materiality of climate-related financial risks. Banks' risk management policies will also need to be adequate to assess risks that could materialise over longer time horizons, and they will need to consider climate-related financial risks as part of their internal control frameworks. To address the risks arising from the digitalisation of finance, we're emphasising the importance of operational resilience as banks increase their reliance on third parties for technology services and of supervisory access and review of these service providers. Banks' risk management policies also need to be sufficiently comprehensive to identify, evaluate, and control or mitigate material risks related to digitalisation. We're also ensuring that banks implement sustainable business models, considering the impacts of new and emerging risks, and that supervisors assess these strategies as part of their business model analysis of banks. These updates aim to enhance both supervisory approaches and bank risk management practices in the face of new and evolving risks. While the business of banking is inherently risky, it's important that banks implement a strong risk culture and effective risk management practices. To achieve these goals, we're giving greater emphasis to corporate culture and values, ensuring that boards have appropriate skills, diversity, and experience, and promoting board independence and renewal. We're also placing a greater emphasis on banks to foster a strong risk culture, to implement risk appetite frameworks, and to improve their risk data aggregation capabilities. When it comes to transactions with related parties, we're ensuring the definition is sufficiently broad to capture all parties that can present potential conflicts of interest, and are strengthening the limits and processes for approving, managing, and reporting these transactions. We're also ensuring that banks have group-wide programs in place to prevent money laundering, proliferation, and terrorist financing. These updates are designed to fortify banks against risks and build resilience, integrity, and transparency within the banking sector. Recent events such as the COVID-19 pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine war, and turmoil in the global banking system highlight the importance of banking system resilience to a range of different shocks. We're strengthening the core principles to reflect key aspects of the post-Great Financial Crisis reforms to ensure that banking systems remain strong through periods of stress. We're implementing measures aimed at ensuring that banks continue to manage financial risks. To do this, we've introduced a leverage ratio as a backstop to complement risk-based approaches in constraining leverage in banks and the banking system. We're also ensuring that supervisors have the power to require banks to maintain additional capital in the form of a buffer that can be released in the event of system-wide shocks. We've also strengthened expectations for banks' credit risk management practices, including risks related to securitization transactions and counterparty credit risk. We're also making adjustments to requirements for managing problem exposures and provisions to reflect the introduction of expected credit loss approaches to provisioning. We have also enhanced the requirements for managing concentration risk and large exposures by strengthening the definition of connected counterparties and the application of large exposure limits. Finally, we've made targeted adjustments to better reflect the influence of customer behaviours on interest rate risk assumptions and have also strengthened the minimum requirements for internal interest rate risk measurement systems. These measures will help ensure that all banks in all jurisdictions can better navigate the evolving economic landscape and mitigate financial risks. To ensure that banks are better prepared to withstand, adapt to and recover from severe operational risk-related events such as cyber attacks, technology failures and natural disasters, we're taking action to strengthen their operational resilience. We're emphasising the need for banks to identify their critical operations and to map the relevant interconnections and interdependencies that are necessary to deliver critical operations through disruption. Banks will also be required to implement policies and processes to manage the risks associated with service providers, including monitoring financial conditions, maintaining effective control environments, developing exit strategies, and the right to inspect books and records. These updates aim to strengthen banks' ability to identify, assess, and mitigate operational risks effectively, while also being able to continue to deliver critical operations through disruption.
Thanks for watching this policy brief on our 2024 updates to the core principles for effective banking supervision. We hope this video has provided you with insights into the evolving banking supervision landscape and the critical role that the core principles play in strengthening the quality of supervision and in building a more resilient banking sector.